Hello, hello, and welcome to Socially Working. I am your host, Raushanah Williams, and I have with us today the man, the myth, the legend, Frank Greenagel. He is an amazing, amazing guy. He's got a lot of letters behind his name, but he is a licensed practicing clinical social worker in the states of New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. Currently, he is the recovery supervisor at Prevention Links and oversees the New Jersey Recovery High School in Roselle, New Jersey. There's a lot. Frank he's been an adjunct professor, is currently an adjunct professor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've been teaching at Rutgers for about a dozen years.
Okay. Currently consults for a variety of treatment programs. You have your own business. So why don't you just give us a little background, Frank, for the people who don't know you, and tell us a little bit about yourself and really like what is yeah, just give us a little background for everybody who doesn't know.
I started doing this work in 2004. I I got sober from alcohol and other substances in the winter of 1995, and I knew I wanted to do some kind of combination of teaching, writing, counseling, and being involved in politics. I wasn't sure exactly how I'd kind of pull that all off. And I got to Rutgers and I majored in history and English, and I ended up doing taking some coursework in alcohol and drug treatment. And all the advice I got in 1998 was that no one wants a 22-year-old therapist. So I was like, okay, I'll keep on kind of with school. And at that point, I fell in love with Shakespeare, and I decided I was going to be a Shakespeare professor and spend my life talking to young people about life and death and politics and war. And um, and then in 2002, one of my closest friends overdosed and died. And I had spent several years trying to get him clean. And people in AA had told me, you really should go to Al-Anon. I was like, no, no, no. I know what I'm doing. I'm young. I'm sober. I'm smart. I can do this kind of stuff. And I really should have gone to Al-Anon. And I was really heartbroken that my friend died. And so I spent a year teaching English in Tokyo, and it was great. And I grieved him and thought about what I wanted to do. And I settled on, oh, I'll go home and I'll work as a drug and alcohol counselor, and figured out from there. And when people ask me what I want to do, I was like, partly it's my own personal experiences, but it's also, my own personal experiences with addiction and recovery issues. But it was also that I would like to have been known how to been more effective with my friend. Not that I could have helped him, even if I were professionally trained. But I'd like to help other people in that situation and help other friends and families so they don't have to experience, or kind of lessen, the amount of those experiences. So I took a job at Integrity House in Secaucus, New Jersey, and pretty quickly, the guy who was supervising me got high and disappeared, and my boss's boss wasn't very good. And I ended up talking to the clinical social worker there, and he's like, you might want to go get further education, get a master's in social work. And that was a couple days before the deadline. So I did it, and I settled on full-time school, full-time work, internship, part-time job type thing, and did that for a long time. And the funny thing is that my work in drugs and alcohol led me to work in grief and criminal justice. And then I went from doing just only micro work to macro work. And eventually I got hired at Rutgers in 2011 to teach social work. And now, all these years later, I talk to young people about life and death and politics and war. And I still bring in a little bit of, literature to my work, a lot of poetry, a little bit of plays. One of the assignments I give my social work seniors is to have them read a play, and that play is often about addiction or it's about grief. It could be about kind of old age and disability. It could be about relationship struggles. It could be about women's rights. It could be about experience that's outside of theirs. So maybe they're learning about like the Muslim experience in the United States or the Jewish experience in the United States, or what it's like to be a woman, or what it's like to be grow up Black and poor, but not in an urban area, but in like a rural setting. So basically, I try to expose people to the world as much as possible. So I'm very happy with how it's worked out. I think I've been much more effective in my life being a therapist and a teacher than I would teacher of social work than I would have been as a teacher of Shakespeare. So it's I've just been open up to the process. So I've been very, very fortunate. I like so much of what I do. And I'd be remiss in saying if I didn't talk about, my outside life is incredible, as just as rewarding as my professional life. I have a very rewarding professional life. But I spend a lot of time hiking. I spend a lot of time doing yoga and biking. I go to a lot of plays. I visit Civil War battlefields. I watch a lot of baseball games. My mom is wonderful. I have a great collection of friends. So I'm very much engaged in life and generally very, very happy, which I think actually makes me a more productive worker. So I try to pass that on to other people.
I think that's often awesome. Two things that I really picked up on was one, I loved how everything seems to have come full circle for you. You started at a place and knowing what you wanted, and then here we come full circle, and you're kind of taking everything that you've learned and everything that you've done, and you've kind of, you're putting it together. The other thing is the last thing you mentioned was the idea of having a balanced kind of life. It sounds like you're very, very busy. You got a whole lot going on professionally, but you are making sure that you take the time to do some things for yourself personally to keep that balance. That's extremely important, I'm sure, for you, to make sure you have that balance. So now you're currently the recovery supervisor at Prevention Links. You oversee the New Jersey Recovery High School, which I personally think is an interesting concept, first of all. But I think it's a wonderful book. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what you think is the importance of the Recovery High School, what it is, how it functions, and what the importance of it is for you?
So we got the first recovery high school in the United States popped up in Minnesota in the 1990s. And we didn't get one in New Jersey until 2014, but it was actually the third effort in trying to get one in New Jersey. DCP&P, when it used to be known as DIFUS, in the early 2000s, they tried to put together a school for kids because they had so many kids who were obviously growing up in troubled homes who had their own drug and alcohol issue. And what DIFUS found, and again, it wasn't just New Jersey, states across the country found this, that it's really hard to identify a kid in a high school who has an alcohol and drug problem. And then if you do identify them, to find a treatment program for them to go to, either inpatient or outpatient, that understands adolescent issues and development and family dynamics. And then if you are able to identify and then find a place and get them to go and get them to go be well, what happens? You return them to the same school with the same halls, the same drugs, the same problems. And so 90% of them relapse within the first month. And so you're spending all this time, all this energy, all this money. And so the idea was to have a school for kids could go to post-treatment where there was no drugs or alcohol in the building. There were people in recovery who worked there who could support the kids and like, hey, I was where you were, to make sure that all the staff, even if the teachers are still teachers, but the teachers at least have kind of a base knowledge of alcohol and drug issues and recovery so they can kind of be more supportive. And they found that if they did that, their hypothesis was if they had that we'd have much better long-term treatment outcomes than just having a kid go to rehab, spending $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 on that, have them come home and relapse on marijuana or alcohol or something else 5 days after getting back. So we have a school. So they tried to get a school, it didn't work. In 2010, I was part of a group that tried to put together a school in Newark, and we just didn't. It was a lot of do-gooders from Montclair. It was a vast majority, a number of white people. We only had two people who actually like worked or lived in Newark. And so again, we didn't understand the politics of Newark or the school system. And so after 2 years, we were denied a charter to open, and it was very frustrating. But one of the people that was on the founders of the school board was a woman named Pam Capacci, who was the previous CEO of Prevention Links. And so she really liked the idea of like a recovery school, recovery high school, recovery high school. She kept kind of pushing the idea. At the same time, around that time, I was chair of the New Jersey Heroin Opiate Task Force. And so we had, I wrote some of the parts of the report I wrote was about the importance of having a recovery college. I worked at Rutgers at the time. And another part of this report that I directly wrote was about the importance of a recovery high school and mentioned some of the issues with a little bit more data that I've talked about now in that. So Pam took that section of the report and she found a willing partner in Senator Raymond J. Lesniak, who at that point who had been a senator a New Jersey state senator for over 30 years representing parts of Union County. And they got Union Votech to agree to partner with Prevention Links to create a recovery high school. So we opened our doors in 2014. So that's kind of a longer version than maybe what you wanted, but we've had the school for 10 years. We have a licensed social worker who for the last 5 years has someone 5.5 years as someone who I've supervised. I've supervised, all three people who have been in that role. And they kind of manage the day-to-day operations. They supervise. We have some young people who are in recovery. They're peer mentors. They're trained as peers and they get regular kind of group and individual supervision. And there are young people who are in recovery that the high school kids can identify with and talk to about difficulties at home, difficulties with relationships, how to tell friends and, friends that you don't want to do drugs and alcohol, trying to come up with ideas how to have fun. How do you handle situations without getting hired? How do you tell people an issue? And then we also have a whole bunch of interns that go in there as well. And then I spend some time each year training the staff from Votech on alcohol and drug issues, but not just alcohol and drug issues, because a lot of times when we have a kid who has an alcohol and drug issues, they may not be just using just to have fun. They might be using to deal with some really tough family turmoil or, their own trauma. They might be self-medicating to deal with ADHD or depression or anxiety, or maybe even suicidal ideation. And so training the staff on that. Not that I want any of them to be therapists or social workers or drug and alcohol counselors, but it's just amazing if you have a whole school filled with every single staff member who understands some basic components of addiction recovery and wellness and can support the kids. So, when a kid is acting out, the teacher knows not to take it personally, even though it might feel very personally, that it's really about some of the kids' trauma, stuff going on from home, some other things. And one of the things I've really worked on the last couple of years is de-escalation techniques across the board, whether it's our social workers, whether it's our student, whether it's our peers, whether it's our student interns, or whether it's the staff on the social work side. And so, because again, it's pretty rough when you have a 16-year-old yelling and screaming or calling you names or digging at you with an area that you feel a little vulnerable in, and recognizing it's not about you, and bringing the kid down, because the kids are there partly because they've done a really good job pushing people away. And so not allowing them to push away. And, the final piece of it is to bring it full circle. I was shipped off to rehab in the spring of my senior year in 1994. And I was I was one of 28 kids in this rehab in upstate New York. And all the kids there smoked cigarettes. I didn't smoke cigarettes. All the kids did drugs. I didn't do drugs. Later on, I would. I didn't identify with it. But I really heard when the adults came over from the adult side of the program, they talked about flaming car crashes and divorce and lost kids and horrific health and all kinds of legal problems and destroyed careers. I heard that. But I came home and I went back to my school, and 5 days after getting home from rehab, I drank because I just hung out with friends. I didn't drink the first day, I didn't drink the second day, but by the fourth and fifth day, I was kind of like, well, and again, I don't regret my path at all. My path worked out very, very well. But someone in my shoes would have had a better shot if they had gone right to a school where there was that kind of social work and peer mentor support, and the teachers had been trained on that stuff. And so, again, I didn't need the school. I got sober a year and a half later. But I had really good parents. I didn't have any other kind of issues. I had great health care. And I had been in therapy. And so there's all of those resources plus a bit of luck. And it shouldn't come down to having lots of resources, and it shouldn't come down to luck. And so we have the school there for any kid that's really going through an issue in the state of New Jersey. And they can come and feel safe and be exposed to some role models and get an education. And it's not just about, for me, it's not just about getting them to graduate. It's what are you going to do after high school? Are you going to go to college? Are you going to go to trade school? Are you going to go to work? And we have all those conversations. So it's of all the things we do at Prevention Links, and there's a lot of things at Prevention Links I'm pretty proud of. It's a thing that I'm most proud of and care about the most. And anyone that's here, if they look hard enough and long enough, they see that my favorite thing in the organization is the Recovery High School.
That, you know what, just hearing that, that's, I hope that at some point, every county in the state of New Jersey and every state at some point like adopts something like this. I feel it's really important to have that transition, the ability for for an adolescent to transition from a rehab or some sort of treatment facility and still go back to get their education, but in a way that's supportive of not just their education but also their recovery. I think that's, as you said, it's really important. It's an important piece that's missing for adolescents who are dealing with any type of addiction issue of any type. And you sound very passionate. So what is it about? What is it about this life that you lead, this field, this being in this field? What is it that has kept you doing this as long as you've been doing it? What's the passion behind it?
So I'm very fortunate in that I had wonderful parents. My mom's 84. My dad died a couple years ago at the age of 82. They were both really, really great. They both did a kind of a lifetime of service. My mom was a high school teacher. My father was a professor for a bit before going into other things. And my mom's background, we go back several generations of teachers, but there's all kinds of public service. So there's a very strong thing in me that I had very good role models as far as wanting to help and make other people's lives better. Um, and then one of the things that my mom particularly did a great job with was teaching me empathy. And so like whenever we read a story or watched a movie, it wasn't just like trying to figure out motivations of characters or what's going to happen or do you understand the plot, but it's how did each character feel, whether it was good or, whether it was a positive emotion or a negative emotion. And I think the thing that my parents and grandparents, but probably particularly my mother did was instill a very strong sense of fairness between where I grew up and who I had in my life. I've had pretty much every advantage someone could have. And so I could screw up multiple times and it would work out. And it worked out. Whereas there's a lot of people who don't even have the opportunity to screw up once. And when I before I so there's a personal thing of kind of public service, but there's an understanding that it's not just that like, oh, I'm really good or talented or hardworking. There's also some luck in play here, and there's also stuff that was way beyond my control that gave me advantages. When I started, from 2009 to 2014, I ran the recovery program at Rutgers, and I love that job very, very much. And it was basically instead of doing it for high school kids, doing it for college kids. Now, the college kids had much higher rates of success because they're either someone's paying money for college, but they're investing in going to school at the same time of recovery, and so and they're older. And the other thing too, the thing that was really hard working with teenagers is that there's the X factor of like where do they live. Whereas with Rutgers, I controlled where they lived because they lived in a dorm that was alcohol and drug free and for everyone else in recovery. And so they weren't having to deal with any kind of chaos in the living space. So many of my kids have chaos in the living space in the high school. But one of the things that popped up was, so like there was a guy who was at the school a couple years after me, because I lived in the recovery house in 1998, 99. And there was a guy who was there a couple years after me. He was a black guy from Princeton. And I had him speak at the Rutgers graduation in 2011. And he was like, yo, Frank, he's like, I'm tired of being like the only person I've ever met a black guy who I ever met who was under 25 when I got sober. And and so one of the things that I recognize is that, if we look at inequality and civil rights, I really, for over a dozen years, wow, almost 2 decades now, I really viewed mental health and addiction treatment as a modern day civil rights issue. If you have money, if you have insurance, you're much more likely to get better care. Now, what predicts money? What predicts health insurance and money is your social class. And so that's the big thing. But obviously, there's minorities have a much lower ability to, minorities in the United States have a lot less access to healthcare. And so one of the reasons that Kyle recognized was that there was a whole bunch of Black and brown people in the United States that didn't even have access to mental health and addiction services. And so one of the things we've seen with the recovery high schools across the nation is that they're usually in fairly affluent suburban areas or rural areas. There's a couple who are in urban areas. There's a couple that are in poor areas. One of the things I'm very proud of is that our recovery high school that, here in Roselle and Union County is the most diverse in the country. We have kids with the hardest economic backgrounds, and that's not like a bragging thing. Like, look how rough our students have it. If we followed the model of other states, our school would be in like Upper Saddle River or Montclair or Tewksbury, or some other kind of like pretty well off area. And the fact that we're in Roselle serving Union County, like, and because Union County has some very wealthy areas, and then it has some poor areas, and so I'm very proud of the fact that we're serving a wide variety. Like we have multiple races at the school, and we have multiple social classes at the school. It's just really nice to be able to be providing help to students otherwise would never, ever, ever, ever get it. And then, the hope is that the whole thing with addiction recovery is that if you can get someone sober, you start helping their whole family. And my thing is like we end cycles. And so it's like it's really hard to get the first person sober in a family. But once you have someone who's in a family who stopped using alcohol and drugs and have found a pathway to recovery, it's more likely that other people in the family who might be suffering from that also kind of get on the path to recovery. So it's tremendously rewarding. I love seeing people get better and do well. That's really nice. Sure, there's a personal element, but there's also that when I was younger, it was all about like what I could get and would I be recognized and what's good for me. And each decade, I mean, I got through that in my 20s, but each decade as I've aged, I've been more interested in other people's success and how they're doing. And look, I like good things that happen to me. I like my time off and I like to do all the things I do. But I get tremendous satisfaction from people doing better. And I also think part of that is I really struggle with humanity. And I think when I talk about this, a lot of people identify it. I'm very glad that most news organizations no longer allow people to like comment on news articles at the end of like but 15 years ago, I'd read about someone who overdosed, and then the comments in like the New Jersey Star Ledger and the New York Times were like, "Good, the parents were probably terrible," or "Let that person die." They're like a waste of humanity. And then you think about that, that's a horrible thing to write. And people write anonymously because they're terrible. Humans are much, much worse online and when they're anonymous. But it's an awful thing for the family members or loved ones of someone to be like, "Oh, great, they were a terrible, they had a terrible parent, or they were just a waste of time, or whatever." And so I'm glad those comments have stopped. That the ideas behind them haven't stopped, but again, very few news articles allow for comments anymore because the commentary was so negative. And so I really struggle. If you watch stuff on TV, if you look at things on the internet or social media, it seems like an awful, horrible world. And you look at, politics, whether it's internationally or nationally, and you're like, what the hell is wrong with people? And so I struggle with that. And then when I'm around people who are genuinely good and genuinely trying to help other people do better, it makes me feel better about humanity again. So for my own sanity and my sanity, I'm thinking about levels of compassion, happiness, frustration, or lowering frustration levels. I do so much better when I see other people trying to help others and do good. And if I can help develop people to help them help others or do good, man, that is a great life.
So that is a great segue to what will probably be my last question for you, Frank. With all the work that you've done, all the work that you continue to do, and I know, if you're in this field, it is definitely oftentimes, it feels like a very thankless job, but we know we do it for a reason. But for you, Frank, what would you say you would want your legacy to be? If there was a legacy left by Frank Greenagel, LCSW, LCADC, what would that legacy be? What would it look like?
So I'm going to cheat here. I want to make sure I have the quote correct. I probably have about 24 role models that I think about, whether I have quotes by them or books by them or posters or paintings by them. Obviously, I have my parents, I have my grandmother. One of my great role models is Jackie Robinson, the black baseball player who crossed the color line in 1947 with the Dodgers, and I happen to be a Dodger fan, partly as a result of Jackie Robinson. On his grave, it says, "A life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. So, if my life impacted others in a positive way, which I know it has, I'm great.
That's it. That is it, and that is all. That is well said. And as far as I can tell, Frank, a life well lived. Well lived, purposefully and with passion. So, to that, I will say to you, thank you so much for coming on to the show and giving us some information and talking to us for a little bit. I do have one last thing that I like to do with every participant. It is the either or game. Are you game for playing?
Okay?
Real quick
Sure.
game where I give you two options. You pick one or the other. Fun little thing that I like to do with my guests just to see what they'll say. So, you ready to go? Real
I am.
quick, goes like this. Actual book or audio book?
Actual book.
All right. Morning person or night person?
Night person.
Lake or ocean?
Lake, but I prefer a mountain.
Yeah, you're a climber. You're a climber. Absolutely. But okay, so how about this? Would you prefer the view of a lake or an ocean?
A lake.
Okay, see, that makes a difference. All right, crunchy peanut butter or smooth?
Crunchy.
Marvel or DC?
So I'm a huge comic book person. Push comes to shove, I have to go with Marvel, but we're sticking to the comics, not TV shows or movies, which I don't consider like to be official.
Okay. Last thing, and this is for just the folks who even remember this, because this is something that's important to me. Mayo or Miracle Whip?
Mayo.
Come on, Frank. Bravo, bravo. I don't know how I would have felt if you would have said the other. But I do thank you for participating in our podcast. It's been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful time. So, for those of you who are following us or not following us, we do ask that you go to at Prevention Links in New Jersey. You can check us out on our YouTube page. We are also on sociallyworking.buzzsprout.com, and you can find us also on Socially Working on Spotify. So give us a listen. Until next time, we thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll be here soon again. Thanks, Frank.